Before we get started, while everybody is filing in, I want to make sure you're all aware of the upcoming events. This is our second to last big webinar in our webinar series lead-in into the Women in Publishing Summit. So we are very excited to have everyone here today, being that it is February and Heart Month and Valentine's Day and all of those things. We thought it would be really fun to talk about romance and writing romance this month. But what's coming up next week on February 25th, we have a demo of PubSite, which is a website platform for authors. It is a super cool tool. If you don't want to get completely invested in trying to figure out the tech of building a website, I highly encourage you register for that event and come check out what PubSite has to offer. Then, of course, we start the Women in Publishing Summit on March 1st. If you haven't gotten your ticket yet, please do so before the price goes up. We're in early bird pricing, and it is going to be so amazing. We are finalizing the event schedule this week, and I am just mind blown as always. So excited about all of the incredible women that we will be showcasing. On March 9th, we have one of our paid workshops, which is content strategy for authors. It will follow right off of, we talked in January about building your email list, and this is the next piece of that, which once you have your email list, once you're starting to build that platform, what kind of content should you be writing, either on your blog, in your emails, and all of those places. So we'll be digging deep into that. On March 30th, we have a webinar on diversity in publishing. This is going to be a great panel. We've got children's book authors and a couple fiction and nonfiction authors who are all going to be talking about the importance of representation in publishing, why it's important to have diversity in publishing, and just it's a fantastic topic to get involved with. And then April 1st, we'll be launching WIP School again, which there will be much more information about that. Just wanted to put that out there on the date. And our next workshop is April 13th. So lots of stuff coming over the next few months. You can find out all about all of these things at womeninpublishingsummit.com/events. Our webinars are always free and open to the public. Some of the other things are workshops that are paid. All right, without further ado, it's almost 5 minutes after the hour. I see lots of people popping in and introducing themselves, which is fantastic. So I want to introduce you to our incredible speakers today. So first, I'm very sad to say that Kirsten Oliphant could not be here today. She is in Texas, in the area of Texas that is impacted by all of the power outages and water shortages happening right now. And she was our rom-com representative. So I'm going to read her bio anyway, because it's very short. and I want you to know who she is in case rom-com is what you are looking to do. She does have a free rom-com group on Facebook, which you can learn all about. Kirsten Oliphant has an MFA in fiction and these days writes under the pen names Emma St. Clair and Sullivan Gray. She has written over 20 novels, hit the USA Today bestseller list under 2 different names, and hosts the Create If Writing podcast for indie authors. She also has a Facebook group under that same name. So if you want to connect with her on rom-com, the Creative Writing podcast and website is definitely the best place to do that. Okay, next we have Ines Johnson. Okay, a lover of fairy tales, folklore, and mythology. Ines Johnson spends her days reimagining the stories of old in a modern world. She writes books where damsels cause the distress, love it, princesses wield swords, and moms save the world. Yay, moms. Ines writes books for strong women who suck at love. I need to share these with my sisters. If you rocked out to the twisted triangles of Jem, Jericha, and Rio as a girl, if you were slayed by vampires with souls alongside Buffy, yay! If you need your scandalous fix from Olivia Pope each week, then you'll love her books. Wow, just from that description, I think I need to go buy all of your books. Aside from being a writer, a professional reader, and teacher, Ines is a very bad Buddhist. She sits in, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, sangha each week. And while others are meditating and getting their Zen on, she's contemplating how to use teachings to strengthen her plots and character motivations. She lives outside of Washington, D.C. with her 2 little sidekicks who are growing up way too fast. Oh, I know all about that. Okay. Next, so thank you, welcome. Next, we have Yara St John, who became a writer at the age of 12 when she wrote her first novella after secretly reading a Harlequin romance. All of us had our mom's secret bookshelf back in those days, didn't we? Throughout her teens, she penned a total of 20 novellas. Wow. Her love of the craft continued into adulthood. She's the proud author of 36 books with arabesque, Kimani romance, and Harlequin desire, as well as her own indie works. When she's not at home crafting one of her spicy romances with compelling heroes and feisty heroines with a dash of family drama, she is gourmet cooking or traveling the globe seeking out her next adventure. For more info, go to yarastjohn.com, or you can find her on all the places: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, BookBub, or Goodreads. And finally, we have Chrisky Dash, who is a published nonfiction author who is currently out on submission with her first novel, a sweet contemporary romance. Having already published, having already published in nonfiction to a very different audience, she is writing novels under the same name, under the pen name, I'm not reading well today, under the pen name Savannah Carlyle. She plans to write sweet romance set in small coastal towns, much like the island where she lives. Chrisky is a former practicing attorney turned journalist who founded boutique PR agency Guide My Brand in 2015 to work with nonfiction authors and solopreneurs. She is currently a contributor to outlets such as Forbes, Entrepreneur, Pop Sugar, and AARP. Formerly ESPN sports business reporter, she continues to join the radio and television programming to cover sports business news. My, this is an impressive panel of ladies. And it's Dosh, isn't it? I always do that. No, I did it right this time. Tried to do Dosh, then went to Dosh. I got it right this time. And then I thought I had it wrong. I'm bad with names.
Another reason for me to have a pen name. Nobody ever gets Carlisle wrong.
Well, I got it right this time. And then I'm like, I messed myself up. But thank you. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I wanted, from a very, selfish manner, I wanted to have this panel because I am writing my very first romance. And I thought, how fun to bring in some experts to talk about the genre itself, because I would say the first thing that I started to realize as I started to write romance is that romance is not just romance. Like, there's so many subgenres and there's so many things to know about those subgenres. So first, I'm just going to ask each of you a couple questions about your journey and how you started and all of those things. And then we'll dig into some more specific questions, and then we'll have questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with Yara because she's up in the top left-hand corner. So you told us you started writing really, really young, and you were inspired by your mother's, I'm guessing, bookshelf of Harlequin. Where did the Harlequin come from? How'd you get into that?
Absolutely. Well, my mom had always been into soap operas. So I grew up in the, I know I'm aging myself a bit here, but, late 70s, early 80s. So it was all about the soap operas. So I grew up watching those dramatic stories on soap operas, on the Dynasties, the Dallases. And then, of course, my mom was such a big reader that, there were tons of Harlequins and, Danielle Steele's and Jackie Collins books lying around. And so, I would just grab one of those and start reading. And, and then my love of book writing just took hold from there. And I decided I wanted to write my own stories. And so when I was 12, I wrote my first book about going to summer camp. And I got one of those old library cards where you have to write your name and your homeroom number down. And I would make my friends check them out like library books.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. So now you've written over 20, over 30?
36.
36.
Yeah, 36 books right now. Yes, I've written, my original contract was with BET Books, who then went to Arabesque, and then Kimani Romance, and then now I've been writing for Harlequin Desire for a few years now, and cool. Because I have a new series coming out this year, Lockets of Tuxedo Park.
So one of my team members wants to know which soap opera inspired you. Were you Days of Our Lives, Y&L? Which one was it?
Believe it or not, my all-time favorite was Santa Barbara. I know I'm very dated, but I love Santa Barbara, and then General Hospital is probably my second favorite.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right, Ines, what about you? How did you get started on this wild, crazy journey of sword fighting moms? And
Well, I come from television. I studied, I was a film major for one semester. When they put the film in my hand, I was like, oh, I don't like this. And then I switched over to television. And I worked in the television industry for a number of years. And romance was my escape. I was always a lifelong reader, but romance was my escape. And scripts got harder to sell. And so I turned an idea into a romance novel, and people started buying it. So I just kept on writing. And it was easier to publish a book than it was to produce a television show. So that's where I started.
Oh, yay. Well, Christy, you are kind of the most surprising author in this group, because I know you from years now of interviewing you for PR for nonfiction writers and all of this stuff. So it was really fun when I saw you starting to post that you were writing sweet and clean romance, correct?
Yes.
What on earth? I mean, I know you were busy before. So what made you decide, let me just start a pen name and start writing romance?
So I've known that I wanted to write fiction for 10 plus years, because I very distinctly remember that when I was querying my first really was my second nonfiction book, I was looking for an agent who represented both, because I knew one day I was going to want to write fiction. So I just wanted to get an agent that could represent me for both. And so I signed with Laura Bradford, who's still my agent 10 years later. I don't know why she hasn't dropped me yet, because I haven't had a new book since 2013 when my last sports book came out. But she knew that I wanted to eventually write fiction. I sort of had to take a break from writing for fun to start my agency, which will be 6 years old this year. And then I've always been a journalist and written for publication. So for me, I love to write. It doesn't matter what it's about. And so I've always written in some capacity. And it really took me until, I'd say, I really started paying attention and writing on my fiction. It's been close to 2 years ago now, because I had hired enough help in my agency that I didn't have to be in it working on client work all day, every day. And that freed me up to have a little time. And so I still do a lot of things and wear a lot of hats. So for me, it is carving out 1 hour every day. It's the first hour I sit down at my desk to write, and however much I can get done in that hour, great. And that has allowed me to now write 2 novels in the last 2 years. One is out on submission, and I just delivered the second one to my agent last month. So fingers crossed.
That's a perfect transition to the questions that I kind of wanted to start with. Is talking about the different routes to publishing for romance authors and some of the differences that come through traditional versus indie and hybrid and all of that stuff. So we know Christy is querying through a traditional agent. Yara, you've done both. Are you still signed under traditional? Are you doing more indie now?
I'm doing both. I'm a hybrid author, both traditional and indie.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you so that you can first explain to people what that looks like. What is, for some people, that may be a brand new term, a hybrid author. I mean, you just explained it, both traditional and indie, but what does that look like?
Yeah, so basically a hybrid author means I do both. I have a traditional publisher where I have a set contract for a certain amount of books to produce after I've sold them on a book and or series. In this case, when I talk about The Lockets of Tuxedo Park, my new series coming out April 1st, I sold them on a 4-book series. And typically for a new author, you would be looking at having to do some type of synopsis and first 3 chapters. Obviously, because I've been with Harlequin, for a decade, I don't need to submit that. All I submit is a few paragraphs, and I can usually tell my story from there. Which is what I did for this series. So I get a contract, and you get advance against earnings. And then once the book makes back those advance against earnings, then you would get royalties from that. So that's kind of a traditional publishing scenario. And as Christy was talking about, you can have an agent. An agent can help you get that sort of traditional publishing contract in which, you can submit your synopsis and first 3 chapters to an agent who then will reach out to several different publishers, trying to get you that first contract.
And Christy, are you submitting single books, or are you submitting a series?
Well, it started out as a single book, but I actually had an editor at one publishing house come back and ask my agent, could I turn it into a series? And I said, sure, I can do anything you want, just sign me. And she still has not passed or accepted my idea. I did have to write up sort of a 2-page treatment of what the next book in the series would look like. And actually that publisher also asked me to put together a synopsis for another unrelated book. I guess they wanted to see, my understanding from my agent is that they wanted to see I wasn't going to just be like a one and done, that I was going to have a real career if they signed me. But I have to say, even having gone through this process before as a nonfiction author, in nonfiction, you write up a proposal. I got my book deal, I think in the first month, my agent had me on submission. And so there wasn't a lot of time to like stress out about it. I have been on submission with my novel for exactly 1 year now. She put me out on submission at the end of last January. We still have publishing houses that have not made a decision yet. And I've already written my second one while I was waiting. I chose to write the second one separate and not the second in the series in case that first book doesn't actually become my first published book. So it's been a real, if there's anybody listening who's written nonfiction, the switch is a little jarring. It's a really different process.
And Ines, are you completely indie published or?
Completely indie.
Okay, so what's that process look like compared to what these ladies just described?
Well, I've not been traditionally published, so I don't know that life. When I wrote my first book, I had an idea. I wrote it down. I looked at the process of putting a book up on Amazon at the time. And I was like, I understand this. I know how to do this. And I hit publish and people bought the book and they kept buying the book. So I wrote another one and people bought that one and kept buying it. So I guess I with my process, it's get an idea, write the book and put it up there and see if the audience likes it. And then if the audience does like it, then it becomes a whole idea of how do you keep those people coming back? How do you keep in touch with them? And how do you let them know you have the next book?
That's a great point. And before we get into I think we'll finish up this with talking about some of your best tips for growing your audience and marketing. But what I want to talk about next is you all represent very different subgenres of romance. And like I said at the beginning in the intro, this was one of the most surprising things to me. Like this is just a, very basic thing. I did not know to be considered as a romance, like romance top, you have to have a happily ever after. To me, that was the first thing I learned. Like they have to end up together and be happy at the end of the book, or you cannot call it a romance. So, but there's lots of other things. The farther I dig deep into this genre, the more I realize there is just as much to learn about your audience and their expectations as there is to learn about writing and publishing if you're indie publishing and marketing and all of those things. So I'm just going to keep in the same order here. And I would like each of you to talk about your subgenre, kind of what the expectations are. And if people are writing for example, steamy, some of the things that people need to know about how to please their audience. So we'll start with Yara.
Okay, so steamy doesn't necessarily need to mean erotica because I don't write erotica. And erotica uses certain language to describe, sexual acts or body parts and things like that. So I'm definitely more subtle in my approach when you think steamy. So, but there's a certain level of sensuality between the characters. And, you talk a lot about their emotions, what they're feeling during the moment. You get in touch with your senses when you're talking and describing, the lovemaking and so forth. So I think that's what I mean by steamy. It doesn't necessarily have to mean raunchy or go into the kind of 50 Shades of Grey, BDSM type of that sort of thing. That's not my jam. I'm definitely more subtle in my approach and don't use the more bold word choices that they might use in erotica.
What are some of the subtleties that you would want steamy writers to know about in terms of like description, cover, from the indie perspective? Since obviously when you're traditionally published, that's all handled by them. But for indie authors, how should they be doing that?
Since I I work with a traditional publisher, I don't have as much say on the cover. I give insight as to the best scenes that I feel support the story. So I usually will give at least 3 or 4 suggestions of a scene in which the characters are not necessarily intimate, intimate sexually, but more intimate in conversation and going deep into their thoughts and motivations and so forth. And then from an indie perspective, I have more flexibility. So that is the fun part if you want to indie publish, but it's a lot more work on the back end, but you do have more freedom to be more expressive. I think on one of my indie covers, the heroine didn't have on a top. It was just a glimpse of a little bit of bosom. So I was able to be a little bit more steamier with Restless Hearts than I think I had been with some of my other covers, or just showing a leg, a bare leg hiked up against him, so I could be a little steamier in those sort of covers.
All right, so Ines, you are primarily would you describe it as paranormal? I already forgot what I read in your bio. Sorry, I had a moment there.
I have 3 pen names. I don't keep them a secret. NS, which are my initials, writes very steamy erotic romance, like 50 Shades of Grey. NS, INES, she writes urban fantasy, paranormal romance, fantasy romance, and then Shanae writes sweet, clean, and wholesome romance.
Okay.
And the reason that I have those 3 is because I made a mistake when I first started, and I wrote a super steamy menage romance, and then I followed that up with this it was called Pumpkin, a Cinder Mama story, which was about mothers getting a second chance at love. And so the people who read the super steamy menage, and then the people who looked at the pumpkin, which is the single mother, they were like, we don't understand. We want this, we don't want that, or we want this, we don't want that. So that's the first thing that I needed to understand when you're asking about the different genres and the different expectations. You have to understand where your reader's lines are. And one of those lines might be the level of steam in the books. And so I had to differentiate myself because some of my audience did not want to cross over the different lines. So I differentiated there. But if you're asking about what are the hallmarks that you want to always hit with romance, I come from television. So in television, we have what are called beats. If you still watch scheduled television, you will notice that when a commercial breaks, it's almost as if a movement has happened before the commercial breaks, and then after the next commercial break, it's like another movement. We call those beats, and there's beats to romance. So there should be a meet cute, because the man and the woman, or the man and the man, or the man woman, they all have to meet it up at some point, and there has to be an adhesive point. Then at some point, what we call in television the fun and games, or in film, the fun and games, which is kind of that montage that you can always look back on, and oh, he looked at her and they were walking along, and ha ha ha, this funny thing happened. Or there's that fun and games section that happens shortly after Act 1 that you should have in a romance. There's also what in television we call a midpoint, but I heard another author call it the mirror moment, and I love this because your character goes through a change from the very beginning, Act 1, to the very end of the book. And at some point, oftentimes they're looking at some type of reflective glass or the water, or someone's looking at them. And there's a mirror moment where they realize they're not who they used to be, and they realize who they want to be, and they have to move forward from that. Then we have that dark night of the soul where the couple, maybe they break up or their greatest challenge comes. And then finally, because it's a romance, there should be a grand gesture done where the lovers come back together. You can see what the happily ever after looks like. So that should be there in every romance, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But then if you want to break it down to something like a paranormal romance, then one of the things that I would say that you want to have in there is you have to have that show of power, because you have the supernatural creature, like a vampire who flashes his fangs, or a wolf or shifter who shifts into the other animal that he should be in. And really the best way to know those beats, those obligatory scenes, is to read in the genre.
Yes, that's such a good point. I've been reading like crazy. There's so many different styles and so many different things. You brought up so many good points that I want to come back to, but I want to let Christy talk to us for a moment on sweet and clean and the expectations there.
Before I talk about that, I just wanted to say I'm with Ines on the mirror moment. That was something I didn't read about and really understand until I was writing the second novel, and it made the second novel a lot easier to write. So I looked it up because I wanted to remember. There's a really great craft book I read on that, and it's called Write Your Novel from the Middle. It's by James Scott Bell. I can drop something in the chat when I get done talking, but he talks about knowing what your mirror moment is and then actually planning the rest of your novel around that midpoint mirror moment. And it really changed how I wrote my last one and actually made it much faster. It took me 1.5 years to write my first novel. It took me 45 days to write the second one.
Wow.
So.
That's a
and
big
I
change.
largely credit it to that book. So it might not work for everybody, but that mirror moment thing was big for me too. Okay, sweet and clean. First of all, there's a huge debate that I see all the time on social media about whether sweet and clean are interchangeable. My agent described it to me as interchangeable, but I have seen arguments made in Facebook groups that sweet doesn't have to be clean. So I have used them both interchangeably. For me, it essentially just means Hallmark in a book. I'm a big Hallmark junkie, and a lot of what I read is along those same lines. And some of those authors call them, some of them say they're doing sweet romance, some say they're doing clean romance, some say wholesome, some just say contemporary romance. But the sort of hallmark feature of those books is that generally the most the couple ever does is kiss, and often the kiss doesn't happen till the very end of the book. And so there's not a lot of, intimate moments in terms of physical intimacy. Like there's certainly moments when they are close together and aware of each other, but you get a lot less of the description. And if you've ever seen a Hallmark movie, I mean, that is those kind of books. And that was what I wanted to write. I actually cover Hallmark movies for Pop Sugar and for AARP. I'm a Hallmark junkie. And they started a publishing line. And quite frankly, that is what sort of spurred me to finally start writing my novel, was they started that publishing house. And I thought, I want to write for Hallmark. Like, that's what I want to do. They've already passed on my first novel. So that is not where my first novel is going to find its home, but I credit that with getting me started. And then there's a number of other publishers who work in that area of the genre as well. So yeah, it's just what I'm comfortable writing and what I love to read. And it is right. You've got to read in the genre you're going to write in. People will be able to tell if you haven't. And that's when you see the really bad Amazon reviews for people, is when someone bought the book thinking they knew what they were getting into because they read widely in that area, and then they didn't get what they expected.
Yeah, that we cannot say this one thing more. And I've heard this from multiple romance writers over and over and over, how they made this mistake themselves. They did not know the expectations of the genre well enough before they tried to publish in it, and then they were just skewered on a stick. But some of the other things that I wanted to bring up too, that Ines mentioned the pen names, and this is a question we hear a lot about why you should write under different pen names. And I think that, I mean, that it just digs into this point of, I mean, you're writing sports and other things like this. If they know you for your sports book, like it confuses your audience, and your audience, especially in reading these types of books, you want to make sure that they have their expectations set, and that's what's going to come next and out for them. So would y'all like to talk any more about this and about separating out genres under pen names, and kind of more about maybe like Amazon categories? And I know Kirsten talks a lot about this, so maybe I'll just give a synopsis of what I think she would say if she was here, because we've had this conversation multiple times. But when she decided to break out her pen names, it was because of this large factor of your audience and following you. But not only that, it's because if you are an indie author and you're out there on Amazon, so much of your traffic is influenced, whether you realize it or not, by your also bots and by the other things that are in, that show kind of who you are as a writer. So if you're writing all over the place, and if your readers are reading all over the place, then it's really hard for new readers to determine if you're a good fit for them or not. And that can make a really big difference. So when you focus in on a pen name and on a genre and on a subgenre, and you're doing everything that matches along with that the other books people are reading are sweet, that the other books people are reading are steamy or whatever, then it sends a subliminal message maybe to people that they're in the right place and they can trust your books. But do y'all have anything else to add on to that?
I can add that choosing a pen name was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And maybe that's because I was having to do it in tandem with my agent. And so I had to sort of satisfy her requirements on top of mine. But just to sort of share everybody, what she told me from her perspective is that it needed to be something that was easy for people to spell. Like if they heard me on a podcast interview, you want to make it easy for them to look you up. You want to Google the name and see what comes up, because one of the first names that I picked that I really liked, I knew I want Savannah to be my first name. I love the city of Savannah, and I just knew that's what I wanted to be my first name. And the first last name that I picked out, when I Googled it, it was a woman who'd been on like a murder rampage in a small town. And so you don't want when people Google you because they're looking for your sweet romance book to come across a serial killer. So I had to rework that. And then I chose another name that a historical romance author had. And so, you know, people might get confused because we had the same name and we're both romance, but in different areas of romance. So I went through a lot of names before I got her to approve one. She was a big proponent that your last name should be in the first half of the alphabet because she's formerly a bookseller. And even though people don't as often go stand in Barnes and Noble and look at the shelf and pick out a book, that was something that was important to her that wasn't at all important to me, but that I caved on because she said it was important to her. So that whole like process, it wasn't like I just sat down one day and was like, this is the name I'm going to use. It took weeks and weeks, and I had to really research what could I get the URL for? What could I get the social media handles for? So it's a little more involved than I thought it was going into it.
And you bring up a lot of good points about all of the branding that comes along with it and all the other pieces that you should think through before you just plop your name on a book. Yara, do you write under any pen names, or are all of your books under the same name?
They're all under the same name, but you know, it really depends on how different the genre is that you're writing. If you're writing sweet and spicy, those same readers will probably follow you. You know, it's when you make that shift to more, and even erotica, because I kind of watch what a lot of my readers and other authors that, you know, I'm friends with on Facebook, I see it, and they all write kind of sweet, spicy, you know, erotica. And most of those readers will still follow them. I think when you maybe start to do a little maybe paranormal or something like that, that shift, depending on your reader, might not quite work, or BDSM or something like that. So because I tend to write contemporary and, you know, some kind of rom-com women's fiction, then, you know, I think that's an easier transition. So but when I, you know, because I've been around so long, when I picked out my pen name, Yara is my real name. St. John is not, it's a pen name. But it's because my last name was very unusual at the time. I've gotten married since, but we went with, you know, I was just trying to find something that went with St. John. And, you know, 18 years ago when I picked my URL, it was available. So I probably didn't have as many issues as you did, Christy, because, you know, social media wasn't as big a platform as it is now. It's actually, I've had to learn and adapt, you know, for being around so long, you know, with being, you know, 16 years published, you know, I've had to adapt with the changing cycle. You know, everything kind of went through a traditional publisher at first, and then, you know, the indie explosion happened. So I had to learn to adapt and move in both worlds.
So I would say I think you're right. In some places it's probably not as big as a distinction. Where I have seen the biggest distinction is from those primarily super squeaky clean and Christian type readers. Like, they don't mess around with curse words or anything sex. So you gotta know that. Even darn might be too high. Careful. Oh my goodness, we've seen some interesting things. But okay. So I would like to, we're at 1:35, so I want to make sure we have plenty of time for answering questions. So this next round, I would just ask you all to maybe provide a couple of your favorite tips. Did my audio just go out? No, it's okay. Okay, no. Your favorite tips. So we'll, I'm going to start with Ines this time since she hasn't gotten to go first yet, and we'll just power through some of our favorite, keeping our audience in mind. We have a wide variety of people here all over the place, but general tips for romance writers.
General.
Or sorry, I think I asked you all to prepare tips for whatever tips you prepared, whatever you want to go with, whatever your heart wants to speak right now.
Well, I guess I can tell you what's worked for me. I come from television, so always take that with a grain of salt. So I was expected to write 13 episodes a year. And I decided very early on that I was going to go after the voracious readers. Some people call them whale readers, but I know me as a romance writer, I sometimes read 4 books a week and don't think that that's anything strange. So I knew that I needed to build my backlist, and that was my goal. If you actually I erased it, but I used to have in big letters, build your backlist, because I knew that once I got a fan, that was how I was going to keep them, by giving them more content. So what's worked for me is not just writing just the one book. Also, because I come from television, what's worked for me is writing in series. So I don't think just a standalone book. I think, okay, I've built this town and there's 6 best friends in this town. Everybody gets a story, and one leads into the other. Just like with the soap opera, there's never an ending. There's always you think that the couple is in bed together, and you think they're gonna have their happily ever after, and the door opens and it's the twin. That's how I end my books. My books, I never put the end in any of my books. It's always they're happy, and then the next character, something blows up, metaphorically. And that's worked really well for me. Readers they go through I can see the read through on my book. As soon as someone buys book 1, I can see it happen. And it's those whale readers, because I can see day after day after day, 5 books, 10 books, 50 books, just keeps going. So think in series, if I could give you one piece of advice.
I think that's great advice. Okay, Yara?
Yes, I agree. Series are definitely the way to go. I think I don't have a big one town, but I have done, I find for me personally, I can do about 4 books in a series, and then I start to need something fresh and I got to try something again. But yeah, I do think in series now to, keep that continuity with readers. What we talked about already as far as tips is reading books in your genre. That's definitely super important. Reading up on the craft of writing, that great book that Christy mentioned about starting your book from the middle. Joining some writer groups. Even I know with COVID, that's a little bit harder to do, but maybe, if there's some online avenues that you can join some writer groups, because if you have a draft and kind of getting some of those feedback from some of those writer groups in those early days way back when, that was very helpful for me. As was, going to some conferences. And of course, again, that's been hard with COVID. But, I know they're doing things online as well. And that just helps you with characterization, plot, storytelling, pacing. All those things are really important when you're trying to put your book together.
Thank you so much. And Christy, are you going to take us down tips on trying to traditionally publish, or do you have some writing tips, or where are you going with this one?
I'd say the thing, because I talk to a lot of people who want to write books, and I think that nonfiction, fiction doesn't matter. If you want to write a book, I think the biggest thing is starting to block off time to do it, or you won't make the time for it. We're all busy with a million other things. So I think I mentioned earlier, like the first hour of my day is my writing time. And once I get into a rhythm with it, I can knock out 1,000 words in an hour every day. And so I can write, an entire book. And I did 45 days this last time, but I was writing more like 3,000 words a day when I was doing that one. I was under a little bit of a deadline for a weird reason. And so I learned how much I can cram in, but that took me far more than an hour. So it's having that time blocked up in your schedule, and having a goal is useful. At least for me, having that 1,000 words a day goal is super useful to kind of keep me on track and keep me moving. And I give myself grace. I mean, there's days that I can't write for whatever reason, or I sit and I stare at the screen. It happens, but I've got that hour blocked off to work on it every day. And then a problem I had that I didn't hear either of the other ladies talk about, so it could totally just be me, but I love the craft books and courses, and like I did it all, because the first manuscript I ever sent to my agent years ago, she tore to shreds. She said, my character development was terrible. My pacing was terrible. Basically it was all wrong. And I have like a stack of books, I'm looking across the room, on craft. And I got really in my head when I wrote my first one, trying to like hit every beat. Like I think somebody said in the comments, they talked about Save the Cat. I took a course on Save the Cat. I read Save the Cat, and then I flipped out when I like couldn't find every single little beat in my story. And I worked with a writing coach, and she was like, okay, let that go. And so I had to really learn how to like take that craft advice and like keep what works for me and throw out what doesn't. Because if you read a lot of it, you get really in your head, and I couldn't move forward anymore. So the two that I keep coming back to are the one I mentioned earlier about writing from the middle, and then romancing the beat. When Ines was talking about the beats, somebody who didn't come from a TV background, I had never heard of that until I read Save the Cat. And Save the Cat is great, but Romancing the Beat is better because it's specific to romance. It's really the same beats, but it's explained specific to romance. And those are the two books I go back to over and over. And the rest of it, I just kind of take with a grain of salt. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I have, that was a suggestion to me from Kirsten too, was to read Romancing the Beats. And it's really kind of funny because I don't know, for those of you who are newer to writing romance in here, for me, I was just I'm a nonfiction writer by training. I sit down, I do my outline, I have the points I want to cover, boom, 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 I write it, send it to the editor, it's done, right? And I was so surprised with like how much knowledge you really have to have about the structure of a romance novel for people to actually like it and want to read more of it. So I would agree that more so than even just craft of writing is craft of genre as well. So great points. Okay, I see Ines over here just hammering away at the Q&A. So look over if you submitted a question, she's answering several of them. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. So I'm going to go through a couple of these questions. I'm going to guess that this one was meant for Christy. Is there a moment when you decide the publishing houses are taking too long and to make a decision, you decide to go a different route?
I think about it all the time, especially having been out on submission for a year now, which is why I went ahead and wrote the second book. My agent said that's really all you can do while you're waiting is have the second one ready to go. So I did that. Now the second one's done. So now I'm back to like, this has been a year of my life that I can't get back. And like, do I need to just self-publish? Because I don't have any problem with self-publishing. I've seen so many people do it successfully. I've followed Kirsten for a really long time. So I'm bummed she's not here today because I've listened to almost every episode of her podcast. I listened to several other podcasts. And I think particularly in romance, self-published authors tend to do really well. And I think Yara and Ines both brought up series. Like series do so well in romance. And most of the really successful self-published authors I know in this space are writing series. The reason it hasn't been right for me yet is that I do run a PR agency and I am still a journalist. And so I feel like with self-publishing, there's so much you have to take on in terms of finding an editor, finding a cover designer, putting together the whole marketing plan. And that's not to say that traditionally you don't have to still do some of the work. Like I work with nonfiction authors all the time. You have to do a ton of PR and marketing work on your own, even if you're with a big publisher. But I'm not ready to like learn all those pieces and hire out and take on all those pieces. So I am still trying the traditional route, but I'm not opposed to changing my mind in the not so distant future because my patience with it is growing pretty thin at this point.
Well, and that's also why hybrid publishing became such a big thing, because then you don't have to figure it all out. Little plug for our gold sponsor, Publish there. They have some great services for authors. Yeah, but I agree with you. Like there are definitely pros and cons. And I mean, I work with some authors who are like, my dream is to be traditionally published and I am not giving up until I get that, or, you know, all kinds of things. So to each of us, we have our own reason for going the route we go, I suppose. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna send this one to Yara. Can a romance novel end the story in a cliffhanger where the two do not end up together, but another new love interest is introduced that will help the woman who is brokenhearted?
I typically romances have a happy ending. You can, set up a, secondary character that you want to have their own story in the future. but I've never had any romance that didn't end with a happily ever after.
Yeah, and from what I understand in my research, like that's you really if you are targeting traditional romance readers and you
Right.
do that where you don't the two don't end up together, you will have very unhappy readers from my knowledge. I haven't done this yet, so we'll find
Yeah,
it.
what I've always sort of heard too is to remember that there are plenty of other genres where you have romantic elements. So like I also read really widely in women's fiction, and the distinction sometimes between women's fiction and romance is so thin, but sometimes that distinction is that it doesn't end in a happily ever after. Otherwise they might look really similar.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, you can write romance and not have to classify it as a romance, basically. Let's see. Would you recommend a pen name for a writer who writes gory horror, paranormal, and murder mystery, and not so dark fantasy and YA? Wow, Lacey, there's a lot going on there. Ines, do you want to answer that one?
I think when you start thinking about pen names, you got to think about your reason why. The number one reason that I think that a lot of people consider pen names is for privacy. So if that's not your concern, then don't worry about it. Another reason people consider pen names is if they're going to have different audiences. So if neither of those apply to you, you don't need a pen name. And just because there are also authors who write whatever the heck they want to write and put it under the same pen name. So you just need to know why you're doing it if you're choosing to do it. If you don't need the privacy, if you don't care about your audience knowing the different pen names, because pen names are a lot of work. They're a lot of work. So if you don't have to do it, I would not do it.
So she's writing horror because she had a part 2 question. If she's writing horror and gory and all of these kinds of things, and then she decides to write romance, what do y'all think between the three of you at that point in time? Should she consider a pen name?
I stick by my same answer. If you understand that it's going to be a lot of work, if you're not going to, those are going to be two different audiences. If you don't think that they're going to follow you, or you don't care that they're not going to follow you, then you don't need it. But if you're like, I need to build a brand new audience for the secondary world that I want to write, then do it and know that you're starting from ground zero again.
Yara, Christy, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I would just say picking, you don't have to pick a pen name. Like I said, the only reason I went with, St. John was just, as Christy mentioned, you really want a name that's going to be easy to remember, easy to spell. And because my previous last name was really complicated, that's why I went with St. John, and it's made it a lot easier. But I like the Yara because it's still unique. And so they can always say, hey, I have a Yara book. So.
Okay, good. Christy,
Yeah,
anything to add?
I only did it because my audiences were so different. So my other two books are sports nonfiction. My readers are probably 85% male. They're not interested in my romance writing. So part of it too for me was social media. Like I have a huge following on Twitter for sports. And I a few times have mentioned that I was writing this romance novel, and my followers were not interested in hearing about it and really told me how uninterested they were in hearing about it. And so I realized I needed a pen name because I needed separate social media accounts, because I was never going to be able to use the ones I have to promote my books when they come out, because wrong audience.
Yeah. So then the next question follows right along. The people are very interested in the pen name now. If you have a pen name, do you have to do the whole website, Instagram, all of that for each pen name? I'll let Christy and, well, both of you two actually, Ines can talk to that.
I did, for the reason I just explained, in that my existing social media accounts are all hugely followed by male sports fans, and they are not going to tolerate me talking about my romance novels, is what I learned really quickly. It's funny because some of them have been interested and have now followed me on my pen name accounts, but the vast majority are not, and I don't want to alienate that audience because I still work in that space too. Right. So for me, I really needed it, but having to keep up another website and get blog posts up and keep up another Instagram, or it is a ton of work, and I wouldn't do it unless you feel like you absolutely have to.
Yeah.
Ditto. The only thing that I would add is that I have seen some people do it where they keep the both. They'll have pen name 1, pen name 2 on the same website, and then you choose which route you want to go.
Oh.
And I thought that was really elegant.
Yeah, that's a super smart idea.
I feel like Kirsten might even do that. I wish she was here because I feel like on her site you can do like a drop down and get into her different pin names. But maybe I'm remembering somebody else's site.
Might be on her creative writing website. I'm not sure. I follow her Emma St. Clair stuff, but I don't follow the Savannah, the other one, the gray. Is it Suzanne? Savannah? I don't know. Now I'm confused because you're a Savannah. Sullivan Gray. That's right. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. What's a good genre to describe a book that may include drama, mystery, romance, suspense, and references to religion? My characters have faith, but they are not perfect.
I think because Joan, I think because you mentioned religion and then you said faith, I'm wondering if that might be the key secret sauce that you're writing. And if that is the key secret sauce that you're writing, then I would say Christian fiction as your big umbrella, and then maybe Christian mystery. And mystery and suspense are sometimes like have a little hyphen in between them. I think a book can be a lot of things, but I think when you're ready to market the book and you're about ready to find that perfect reader, you should focus on that, the biggest element of your book, and that might be Christianity, or that might be the mystery of your book. So look at the big part and where that audience is, and line that up first. Not saying that you shouldn't have all this stuff, but just focus on the number one thing to get you an easier path to that reader. Sorry.
I think that's great advice. Either of you have anything to add to that, Yara or Christy? Okay, we'll go to the next one. All right, do romance novels generally do better if your two main characters have some major terrible events that happens to bring them together, or can it just be a sweet love story without tragedy? Yara.
Nothing terrible has to happen to, your two main characters, but you do have to have a sufficient amount of, the first word that came to mind was drama, but it's not drama. Conflict. Thank you. a sufficient amount of conflict, and that both characters are kind of going through some type of personal angst of some kind, to help propel the story. But you can have, your romance is going to be whatever you want it to be, whether it's a sweet love story or whether it's romantic suspense or contemporary romance. It's whatever you want it to be. And if you want them to have these terrible things happen, but yet bring them together, it could be a great story.
I love the idea of the dark moment, even if it's not like super duper dark. So for example, in the one that I'm writing now, like they have just a giant fight. Like there's a giant fight, not like they just have this shouting match, and she thinks it's over and done with, and like she goes on her way. And so like it's that moment where you're like, okay, they're not going to make it. They're not, something's going to happen. Something is going to happen, and they're not going to be together. And then you resolve that, and that's how the book usually ends, from what I have found. What do you think, Christy? Does yours include some kind of dark moment?
Yeah, so I think the mistake I made in the beginning that I have since learned from is thinking that conflict was just external conflict, like the things that are keeping them apart externally. And I think what has made my writing easier is really starting to like grasp the idea of internal conflict, and that I do give each of my characters an emotional wound. There's like an emotional wound thesaurus, which is also another great craft book. I have all the craft books, guys. And I should start a blog where I just review all the craft books maybe. And that emotional wound, sometimes it comes from something super traumatic. Like the book I just finished, the woman in the book does have something super traumatic in her past that gave her emotional wound. The guy has an emotional wound, but it wasn't from something nearly as traumatic as what the woman went through. But they each have this, internal sort of conflict they have to overcome. They have to become different people in order to earn their happily ever after. And that's something I don't think I understood when I sat down to write my first book.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Ines, do you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, I'm looking at the other question.
And I think I already turned off that other one. So we were saying, does there have to be a tragedy or a dark moment or
No.
something like that?
If you want there to be, I think Christy answered it perfectly. If you want there to be, one other thing that I would add to that is, me and one of my favorite reading buddies, we crave books where the dark moment isn't a breakup. Because if you look in the romance that beats, it's the breakup, right? So it doesn't have to be that the characters are physically apart. One of my favorite authors, Janine Frost, whenever she gets to that moment, she just basically throws dead bodies at the couple. And they're like hanging on to each other and they have to figure it out. The stakes get risen so high. So they're stuck together and maybe they're arguing, but they're not gonna break up, but they might not survive. So it doesn't have to be physical rending of the two lovers, but the stakes need to be the highest that they could possibly ever be.
I love that, thinking outside the box a little bit to still make it some kind of conflict or challenge, but it doesn't have to be traditional breakup or yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay. I'm writing romantic poetry books and would like to add romance books to it. Should I have a pen name? Back to the pen name. I don't know. This one was added in earlier. I'm going to guess since this came from Facebook, this probably was a question that got in there. I think that y'all answered the pen name question very adequately. So if this person still has a question, let us know and we'll go back to that one again. Okay. Is it okay to have 3 different point of views in dark romance? The 3 main characters.
That could mean so many different things, Tiffany. Is it a menage romance? Is that why there's 3 main characters, or is one of them the villain? I don't think POVs are a different, more than 2 POVs are a bad thing in just a regular romance novel. But I'm just wondering, how steamy are you getting in there, girl?
So I guess that's a TBD on that one. We only have 2 minutes left. So I would really like to do kind of like a quick round from each of you on your best marketing skills for building and retaining your audience. So we'll just go in the order we started with: Yara, Ines, and Christy.
Social media, social media is a huge platform. Facebook, Instagram, BookBub. I'm not huge on Twitter, but hey, if that's your jam, go for it. Using NetGalley. Social media is your friend.
Perfect.
I have my 3 biggest marketing strategies are thus. My newsletter is my best marketing strategy. Those people belong to me. I can talk to them every week. When I send a newsletter, I push books. But the way that I got my newsletter was twofold. Facebook ads, it took me a year to figure them out, but now I turn them on and the money comes in. The money is paying for my daughter's college, so it's fantastic. The way that I got a huge chunk of my audience, this is my 3rd route, was BookBub feature deals. I studied BookBub like they were going to be my sugar daddy, because they are. And once I figured them out and I got my first and my second and my third, I just kept making sure that my books were like candy to them, that they looked like what they wanted.
Awesome. And on a quick note, we do have in the Women in Publishing Summit, we do have a dedicated session to BookBub deals with Mel Storm. So that's a good one to check out. Okay, Christy.
So I'm still in that don't have a book out to sell anybody yet, but I started, as soon as I picked my pen name, I got the social media accounts and I started an email newsletter. I've actually already been running a Facebook ad. I'm kind of lucky that I have somebody in my PR agency who's good with ads, and I just had them turn one on. And I don't have any book to give them yet. And so I did something, I did a beach read quiz. My books that would be considered beach reads, and that's what I read. So I've been like reviewing other beach reads on my site. I have this quiz that helps people pick the next book they should read. And so right now I'm not selling people anything, but I'm still growing my social media and my list. So hopefully my strategy will work out. That remains to be seen.
Well, y'all, this was really great information. I mean, we could have gone on for a long time, really digging deep into some of these discussions, but I appreciate you taking time out of your day and being here for this. Please, everyone, if trying to write, publish, sell, market your book and building community is important to you, please consider grabbing your ticket for the Women in Publishing Summit if you haven't already. Hopefully these ladies will join us in our community so they can continue to answer your questions and connect with you all over there. And I appreciate you so very much. This was a lot of fun. I am pumped up and ready to get writing. One last time, where can we find you, Yara?
YaraStJohn.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, BookBub, Goodreads.
Awesome. Ines?
InesRice.com.
Easy. And Christy?
Mine'll be the confusing one, because if you go to ChristyDash.com, you're going to get a whole bunch of sports stuff. So go to SavannahCarlisle.com.
Awesome. And you're on Instagram too. So
I'm
everybody's on
Savvy
Instagram.
Carlisle
Go
on all-
follow everybody on Instagram. All right. Thank y'all so much. This was wonderful. Have a wonderful rest of your month, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.